I have, in the course of my observations on this Constitution, affirmed and endeavored to show that it was calculated to abolish entirely the state governments, and to melt down the states into one entire government, for every purpose as well internal and local as external and national. In this opinion, the opposers of this system have generally agreed, and this has been uniformly denied by its advocates in public. Some individuals, indeed, among them, will confess that it has this tendency, and scruple not to say it is what they wish, and I will venture to predict that the same gentlemen who have employed their talents and abilities with such success to influence the public mind to adopt this plan, will employ the same to persuade the people that it will be for their good to abolish the state governments as useless and burdensome. Essays of Brutus, Anti-Federalist paper number 15, March 20th, 1788. Everyone's talking about the new GOP tax plan. They're talking about it on the streets, they're talking about it in the office, they're even talking about it in the schools. And oh man, is the GOP happy. Just look at them in this picture. They all got their smiles on, well, except for that guy in the back right. He's got quite the frown on. But yeah, most of them have their smiles on. This creepy guy in the left next to Paul Ryan has his tongue sticking out. That must mean that he's happy and he can't contain himself. But unfortunately for him and the other smiling bastards in this picture, since everyone else is talking about the GOP tax plan, I decided that I'm going to share a little something about the GOP tax plan. And the little something that I'm going to share about the GOP tax plan just might be the thing to knock that smile off their faces. And that snake tongue back into that damn fool's mouth. Because you see, I'm not going to talk about what the current opposition to the GOP tax plan is talking about. I'm not going to talk about the blue states being hit the hardest by the GOP tax plan's limits on deduction. Nor am I going to talk about the idea that's floating around that the GOP tax plan is going to cut Social Security and Medicare for the poor and elderly. This idea that was first proposed by this demonic-looking man named Chuck Schumer. This idea which even PolitiFact has labeled as only half true. And even if this idea was fully true, this video would still not be about it, because there are bigger problems with the GOP tax plan. And those bigger problems start with the fact that even the Congressional Budget Office claims that this GOP tax plan will increase the deficit by $1.4 trillion over a 10-year period. And I can guarantee you that that is an optimistic projection. And it is very important to note the wording there. It is saying that it will increase the deficit by 1.4 trillion, and in some cases 1.7 trillion. That doesn't mean that the deficit will then be 1.4 or 1.7 trillion. It means that the current deficit, which is, as you can see here, standing at 440 billion, and I'm going to prove that it's actually more than that, but the current deficit, which is 440 billion, is going to be increased by 1.4 to 1.7 trillion, meaning that in 10 years, if we maintain this tax plan, we're going to have a $2 trillion a year deficit. And I'm willing to bet that we'll reach that $2 trillion deficit before 10 years. Before I move on to revealing the sinister purpose of the GOP tax plan, and don't get me wrong, this is not just the GOP tax plan. They are two sides of the same coin, so don't think that I'm trying to gang up on the GOP. This is a concerted effort from both sides of the aisle. They're playing us like fools. Before I get into the sinister purpose of this tax plan, let me first go over something that I just asserted before, which is that the federal deficit is much higher than they claim it is. So they claim it's 440 billion. But as you see from this, and of course, it's 440 billion for this fiscal year. So don't get me wrong, I know what I'm about to say is going to sound really stupid, but just follow me. I'm going to show you now this timeline of the national debt from 2007 to 2015. And as you can see on this timeline, the national debt has increased by roughly $1 trillion a year. That's an average, about $1 trillion a year. Okay, our deficit before wasn't claimed to be that of $1 trillion, but yet it's still increased by $1 trillion a year. except for this little, there's this little oddball out between 2014 and 2015. It didn't really increase by $1 trillion. It actually only increased by about 300 billion then. But from 2015 to now in 2017, the national debt is now 20 trillion 500 billion. So that means from 2015 to today in 2017, the national debt has increased by over 2 trillion, meaning that it's increased on average over $1 trillion a year. And keep in mind, on the books, they did not say we had $1 trillion deficit, but yet our debt has been increasing by over $1 trillion. And now, without much more delay, I'm going to begin to reveal the sinister purpose of this tax plan. And I'm going to do that by quoting another Anti-Federalist paper. The general government is to be vested with authority to levy and collect taxes, duties, and excises. The separate states have also power to impose taxes, duties, and excises, except that they cannot lay duties on exports and imports without the consent of Congress. Here, then, the two governments have concurrent jurisdiction. Both may lay impositions of this kind. But then, the general government have superiority to this power, authority to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying the foregoing power into execution. Suppose then that both governments should lay taxes, duties, and excises, and it should fall so heavy on the people that they would be unable or be so burdensome that they would refuse to pay them both. Would it not be necessary that the general legislator should suspend the collection of the state tax? It certainly would, for if the people could not or would not pay both, they must be discharged from the tax to the state, or the tax to the general government could not be collected. In other words, I believe that the sinister purpose of this tax plan is to raise the federal debt to such a high level that they then have to raise federal taxes to such a high level that it then becomes impossible for the states to levy taxes on their citizens. And when this happens, the state government will then have to consolidate with the federal government. And this consolidation, this lack of tax money to go to the state, will seriously hamper state government activities. There can be entire state branches, entire representative branches within the state that are annihilated because they would not be able to be funded. And at this point, you would essentially have only one government, and our representation would be further diminished.
They want more for themselves and less for everybody else. Now they're coming for your Social Security money. They want your fucking retirement money. They want it back. They don't give a fuck about you. They don't give a fuck about you. They don't care about you at all, at all, at all.